Silence speaks louder than noise, and the people who understand emotions the most are often the ones you barely see online. Scroll through any platform, and a strange pattern begins to form. The loudest voices are everywhere, constantly sharing, constantly reacting, constantly asking to be seen. But the ones who read between the lines, who notice shifts in tone, who feel what others ignore, they stay in the background. They watch everything. They understand more than they say, and yet they choose not to show themselves. This is not accidental. This is not weakness. And it is definitely not a lack of confidence. There is a deeper psychological reason behind this quiet distance, and once you see it, the entire idea of social media starts to look very different. There is a hidden layer to online behavior that most people never question. The surface is easy to understand. People post to connect, to express, to share moments, to feel included. But beneath that surface, there is something more complex happening. Every post invites attention. Every story opens a door. Every image carries emotional energy that spreads far beyond the screen. For most people, this exchange feels normal, even harmless. But for those who are highly sensitive to emotional signals, this constant flow does not feel neutral. It feels intense. It feels overwhelming. It feels like standing in a crowded room where every voice is speaking at once, each carrying its own emotion, its own intention, its own hidden message. And this is where things begin to shift, because the people who are deeply aware of emotions do not just see content, they feel it. They pick up on subtle cues that others miss. A forced smile in a photo, a hidden frustration behind a cheerful caption, the quiet need for validation in a simple post. What looks ordinary to most feels layered and heavy to them. Over time, this creates a kind of mental noise that is hard to ignore. It is not just about what is being shared, it is about what is being felt beneath it. And when that awareness becomes constant, stepping back is no longer a choice. It becomes a form of protection. There is also a lesser-known psychological effect that plays a role here. The more emotionally aware a person is, the more selective they become about where they invest their energy. This is not about avoiding people. It is about avoiding unnecessary emotional exposure. Social media, by design, encourages constant interaction. It rewards visibility. It pushes people to share more, react more, engage more. But for someone who processes emotions deeply, this constant engagement comes at a cost. Every interaction carries weight. Every response requires energy. And over time, that energy adds up in ways that most people never notice. Another layer that often goes unnoticed is the ability to detect authenticity. Emotionally aware individuals tend to recognize patterns of behavior very quickly. They can sense when something is genuine and when it is not. They notice inconsistencies between what people say and what they actually feel. On social media, where presentation often replaces reality, this creates a disconnect. The environment starts to feel artificial. Not entirely false, but not entirely real either. And when someone values depth over appearance, this gap becomes difficult to ignore. Participating in that space begins to feel less like expression and more like performance. There is also the question of control. Most people use social media to gain a sense of connection, but for some it can feel like a loss of control over how they are perceived. A single post can be interpreted in dozens of different ways. A simple message can be misunderstood. And for someone who values clarity and emotional accuracy, this uncertainty creates hesitation. It is not fear of being seen, it is awareness of being misread. And that awareness leads to silence, not because there is nothing to say, but because what needs to be said cannot always be simplified into a caption or a short post. What makes this even more interesting is that many of these individuals are not disconnected from social media. They are present, they observe, they understand trends, behaviors, and emotional patterns better than most, but they choose not to participate in the same way. They engage quietly. They absorb information without broadcasting their own. This creates a kind of invisible presence where they are part of the environment but not fully exposed to it. It is a different way of existing in a space that is designed for visibility. There is also a deeper psychological truth that often goes unspoken. The need to constantly share is not always about connection. Sometimes it is about validation. Sometimes it is about filling a gap that exists internally. But for those who have a strong inner world, that need is reduced. They process their thoughts internally. They reflect before they express. They find meaning without needing an external response. This does not make them better or worse than others. It simply means their source of stability comes from within rather than from outside reactions. Another overlooked factor is emotional memory. People who are highly aware tend to remember how certain interactions made them feel even long after they happen. A negative comment, a misunderstanding, a moment of judgment, these experiences do not just disappear. They stay, not as resentment, but as information. Over time, this builds a pattern of caution. Not fear, but awareness. And that awareness influences future behavior. It shapes decisions about what to share, when to share, and whether to share at all. As the digital world continues to grow, the pressure to be visible increases. There is an unspoken expectation to stay active, to stay relevant, to stay engaged. But not everyone responds to that pressure in the same way. Some people move toward it, embracing the attention and the interaction. Others move away from it, choosing distance over exposure. And neither choice is random. Each reflects a deeper psychological structure that defines how a person experiences the world. What makes this topic even more important is how often it is misunderstood. Quiet behavior is often labeled as insecurity. Limited sharing is seen as a lack of confidence. But these assumptions miss the bigger picture. In many cases, the opposite is true. The decision to stay private can come from a place of clarity, a clear understanding of personal boundaries, a clear awareness of emotional limits, a clear choice to protect inner peace rather than trade it for external attention. There are also moments when this quiet approach becomes a strength. In a space where everyone is speaking, the one who listens gains a different kind of power. The ability to observe without being influenced, the ability to understand without being distracted, the ability to remain grounded while others react. This is not about superiority, it is about perspective, and perspective changes everything. This video will break down these hidden layers step by step. It will explore the psychological reasons behind this behavior in a way that is clear, simple, and grounded in real human patterns. It will reveal why some people naturally withdraw from constant visibility, why social media feels different to them, and how this quiet approach is often misunderstood. It will also uncover lesser-known insights about emotional processing, energy awareness, and the subtle dynamics that shape online behavior in ways that are rarely discussed. By the end, the pattern will make sense. The silence will no longer feel confusing, and the idea of staying unseen will start to look less like absence and more like intention. There is a reason behind every choice, even the choice to remain quiet in a world that rewards noise. And understanding that reason changes the way everything is seen. So stay with this until the end, because each part connects to the next, and the full picture only becomes clear when all the pieces come together. This is not just about social media. It is about how people experience the world differently, how awareness shapes behavior, and how silence can sometimes say more than words ever could. Welcome to the channel. If this kind of deep, thoughtful perspective speaks to you, then stay connected. Subscribe, like, and share this with someone who understands more than they show, because sometimes the quietest minds carry the deepest insights. There is a quiet pattern that starts to become clear the longer someone pays attention to how people behave online. Some people are constantly present. They share updates every day. They post their thoughts, their routines, their wins, their struggles. Their lives are visible in small pieces spread across timelines and stories. But then there is another group that moves very differently. They are there, but not really there in the same way. They rarely post selfies. Weeks can pass without a single update. Their profiles feel still, almost untouched, even though they are not disconnected from the world at all. They see everything, they notice everything, but they choose not to turn the camera toward themselves. It is not because they have nothing to share. It is not because their lives are empty or uneventful. In fact, many of them experience life more deeply than most. They feel more, think more, and process more. But instead of projecting that outward, they keep it contained. They do not feel the same pull to document every moment. They do not feel the need to translate their experiences into posts or captions. There is a natural pause before they share anything, and most of the time that pause turns into silence. Oversharing feels uncomfortable to them. Not just slightly uncomfortable, but deeply off. When others openly talk about personal struggles, relationships, or emotions in a public space, they notice something that most people overlook. They feel the exposure. They sense how much energy is being released into a space where it cannot be controlled. To them, sharing something personal is not just about expression. It is about opening a door. And once that door is open, anyone can walk through it with their own thoughts, judgments, and reactions. That awareness makes them cautious, so they hold back. They keep certain parts of their life private, not because they are hiding, but because they understand the weight of what they are sharing. They know that once something is out there, it cannot be taken back in the same way. Even a simple post can carry layers of meaning that others may interpret differently. That possibility creates distance between what they feel and what they choose to show. Then there are the long disappearances, periods where they go completely quiet. No updates, no interactions, no visible activity. To others, it might look like they have lost interest or pulled away for no reason, but for them, these moments are necessary. They are not breaks from social media in the usual sense. They are resets, time away from constant input, time to return to a quieter state where their thoughts are their own again. During these periods, they are not disconnected from life. They are actually more connected, just in a different way. They focus on real conversations, real experiences, and real emotions without the filter of an audience. There is no pressure to capture the moment. No need to frame it in a way that others will understand. They simply experience it as it is, and that feels more natural to them than sharing it ever could. At the same time, there is a clear contrast between them and the people around them. While many are trying to be seen, trying to stay visible, trying to maintain a presence, they move in the opposite direction. They do not chase attention. They do not measure their value through likes or views. Visibility is not something they avoid out of fear. It is something they question. They do not see it as necessary for connection. They do not see it as proof of existence. This creates a quiet difference in how they approach the same platform. Where others see opportunity, they see exposure. Where others see connection, they see complexity. Where others see a place to express, they see a place where expression can easily be misunderstood. This difference is not always obvious on the surface, but it shapes every decision they make. If this pattern feels familiar, if the idea of staying quiet online feels more comfortable than staying visible, then there is something important to understand. This is not random. It is not a habit that formed without reason. It is not a phase that will simply pass with time. It comes from a deeper place, a place that has more to do with how the mind processes information than with what is happening on the surface. It is easy to assume that someone who does not share much is insecure, that they lack confidence, that they are afraid of judgment or unsure of themselves. But this assumption often misses what is actually happening. The silence is not always about fear. In many cases, it is about awareness. Awareness of how things feel, how they affect the mind, and how they linger long after the moment has passed. This is where the explanation begins to shift, because what looks like withdrawal is often a form of control. Not control over others, but control over what enters and leaves their inner space. They are selective, not because they are limited, but because they understand the impact of what they allow in and what they put out. This is not insecurity. It does not come from a lack of self-worth. It is not about feeling less than others or believing they have nothing valuable to share. In fact, many of them are very clear about who they are and what they feel. That clarity is exactly what makes them careful. They do not need external validation to confirm their experiences. They already understand them internally. It is also not a lack of confidence. Confidence does not always look like visibility. It does not always show itself through constant expression or public presence. Sometimes confidence is quiet. It is the ability to choose not to participate in something that does not feel right even when everyone else is doing it. It is the ability to stay grounded in personal values without needing approval. The way their mind is wired plays a major role in all of this. They process information differently. They pick up on emotional signals more quickly and more intensely. A simple interaction can carry more weight. A brief comment can stay in their thoughts longer. A subtle shift in tone can change how they interpret a message. This heightened awareness creates a different experience of the same environment. And this becomes even more important when it comes to social media, because social media is not just a neutral space. It is filled with constant input. Every scroll brings new faces, new stories, new emotions, new reactions. It is a continuous stream that rarely slows down. For most people, this flow is easy to handle. It becomes background noise, something they can engage with or ignore without much effort. But for someone who absorbs emotions deeply, this constant stream feels very different. It is not just information, it is emotional input. Every post carries a tone. Every caption holds an underlying feeling. Every image reflects a state of mind. And all of this is being processed at once, often without conscious awareness. This creates a kind of overload, not in a dramatic or obvious way, but in a subtle, steady buildup. The mind becomes crowded with impressions that are not its own. Thoughts that did not originate internally start to mix with personal feelings. It becomes harder to separate what belongs to them and what has been absorbed from others. Over time, this starts to feel draining. What was meant to be a place of connection begins to feel like a source of pressure, not because of any single interaction, but because of the accumulation of many small ones. Each piece adds a little more weight. Each moment requires a little more processing, and eventually the cost becomes noticeable. This is where the idea of overstimulation becomes clear. It is not about being overwhelmed by one thing. It is about being constantly exposed to many things at once, each carrying its own emotional charge, each requiring attention even if only for a moment. The mind does not get a chance to rest because there is always something new to process. For someone who is highly sensitive to these signals, this environment becomes exhausting, not in a way that can be easily explained to others, but in a way that is deeply felt. It is the difference between observing something and experiencing it. While others can scroll without much impact, they feel each interaction more intensely, and this changes how they respond. Instead of engaging more, they begin to pull back, not out of disinterest but out of necessity. They reduce their exposure, they limit their participation, they create distance between themselves and the constant flow. This distance is not avoidance. It is a way to maintain balance. What feels normal to others does not feel the same to them. A quick scroll, a casual post, a simple interaction, these things carry a different weight. They require more energy. They leave a stronger impression. And because of that, they cannot be treated lightly. This is why their presence online looks different. It is not because they are disconnected. It is because they are more aware of the impact. They understand something that is not always visible on the surface, that every interaction has a cost, and not all costs are worth paying. So they choose carefully. They decide what to engage with and what to ignore. They think before they share. They pause before they respond. And often they choose silence over expression, not because they have nothing to say, but because saying it in that space does not feel right. And this quiet choice continues to shape how they exist in a world that is constantly asking for visibility. There is another layer that quietly shapes their behavior, and it becomes clearer the more closely you look at how they respond to attention. Attention is not neutral for them. It carries weight, it carries intention, it carries energy that does not always feel safe or balanced. When most people post something online, they are thinking about connection, reactions, or visibility. But for someone who is highly sensitive, posting feels like opening a door that cannot be controlled once it is open. Every like, every comment, every silent view carries something behind it. Not everyone expresses it directly, but it is there. Expectations begin to form. People start to build opinions. Some admire, some judge, some compare, and some project their own emotions onto what they see. This entire process happens quietly, but it is felt strongly by someone who notices emotional shifts. Because of this, posting is not just a simple action. It becomes an invitation for others to step into their space, to interpret their words, to react to their presence. And once that invitation is out there, it cannot be limited to only positive responses. It brings everything. Approval, curiosity, misunderstanding, judgment, and sometimes even negativity that has nothing to do with them personally. For someone who feels things deeply, this mix does not feel light. It feels heavy, unpredictable, and sometimes draining. So instead of constantly inviting that energy, they become careful. They think about whether it is worth it. They question whether sharing a moment will bring clarity or just noise. They consider how much of themselves they want to expose to a space that they cannot fully control. And more often than not, they choose to step back, not because they are afraid of attention, but because they understand its impact. They know that attention comes with a cost that is not always visible to others. It is not about being seen, it is about what comes with being seen. This is where a quiet truth begins to take shape. They do not avoid attention, they protect their peace. That difference is important. Avoidance comes from fear. Protection comes from awareness. One is reactive, the other is intentional. They are not running away from people. They are choosing how much of themselves they allow others to access. And that choice is not random. It is based on experience, on understanding, and on a deep sense of what feels right and what does not. At the same time, another factor begins to influence how they see the online world. It is their ability to notice what is real and what is not. This is not something they try to do. It happens naturally. They pick up on small details that others overlook, a slight inconsistency in tone, a forced expression that does not match the emotion behind it, a message that sounds polished but feels empty underneath. These things stand out to them without effort. Social media in many ways is built on presentation. People show the best parts of their lives. They highlight moments that look good, sound good, and feel impressive. There is nothing wrong with that on the surface. But when someone can see beyond the surface, it creates a different experience. They begin to notice how much of what they see is filtered, adjusted, or shaped to create a certain impression. It is not always false, but it is not always complete either. This creates a sense of distance, not because they are disconnected, but because they are aware of the gap between what is shown and what is felt. They do not just see the image, they sense the effort behind it. They notice the intention. They feel the difference between authenticity and performance. And once that awareness becomes clear, it changes how they interact with everything they see. The platform begins to feel less like a place of genuine connection and more like a stage where people are constantly presenting versions of themselves. Again, this is not entirely negative, it is simply how the system works. But for someone who values depth and honesty, this environment can feel tiring. It becomes difficult to fully engage when so much of what is being shared feels incomplete or slightly disconnected from reality. And this leads to another quiet shift. When you see through everything, it becomes hard to participate in it. Not because you judge it, but because it no longer feels natural. It feels like stepping into a role that does not fully match who you are. It feels like adjusting your expression to fit a format that does not capture the full truth of your experience. And for someone who values authenticity, that adjustment feels uncomfortable. So they step back again, not completely, but enough to maintain a sense of alignment with themselves. They continue to observe, to understand, to learn, but they limit how much they contribute to a space that does not always reflect what they value most. This is not rejection. It is quiet awareness shaping behavior. At the same time, there is something deeper happening internally, a space that is often invisible to others, a place where thoughts are processed slowly and carefully, where emotions are explored rather than immediately expressed. This is their inner world, and it plays a major role in how they exist externally. While many people feel a natural urge to share what they experience, to talk about it, to post about it, to express it outwardly, they move in the opposite direction. They take things inward, they sit with their thoughts, they analyze their feelings. They try to understand what something means before they decide whether it needs to be shared at all. This inward reflection creates a different rhythm. It slows things down. It removes the urgency to react or respond quickly. It allows space for clarity to develop before expression happens. And often by the time that clarity is reached, the need to share has already faded. The experience has already been processed internally, so there is no strong pull to project it outward. This is where the contrast becomes clear. Others express outwardly. They share as they feel. They process through expression. But these individuals reflect inwardly. They process through understanding. Expression becomes optional, not necessary, and because of that, it happens less frequently. There is also a different relationship with validation. For many people, sharing brings a sense of connection that is reinforced by reactions from others. Likes, comments, and responses create a feedback loop that feels rewarding. It confirms that they are seen, heard, and understood. But for someone who processes deeply, that external feedback is not as essential. They are not disconnected from it. They understand its value, but they do not depend on it in the same way. Their sense of clarity comes from within. Their understanding of their own emotions does not rely on external confirmation. This reduces the need to constantly share or seek responses. They do not need validation. They seek understanding. And understanding takes time. It requires space. It requires reflection. It cannot always be captured in a quick post or a short message. It is something that develops internally, often in silence. Because of this, their online presence becomes quieter, not because they lack depth, but because their depth exists in a space that is not always visible. It exists in thoughts that are not shared, in feelings that are processed privately, in insights that are understood without needing to be expressed publicly. At the same time, there is another challenge that shapes their behavior. It is the difficulty of translating complex emotions into simple words. When someone feels things deeply, those feelings often come with layers. There are multiple perspectives, multiple meanings, multiple interpretations all existing at once. Trying to reduce that complexity into a single sentence or a short post can feel limiting. There is a constant awareness that whatever is shared will only represent a small part of the full experience, and that partial representation can easily be misunderstood. People may interpret it differently. They may miss the deeper meaning. They may respond in ways that do not align with what was actually felt. This creates hesitation, not because they are unsure of themselves, but because they are aware of how easily meaning can be lost in translation. They know that once something is shared, it takes on a life of its own. Others will see it through their own perspective, shaped by their own experiences. And that interpretation cannot be controlled. So instead of risking that disconnect, they choose to hold back. They keep certain thoughts to themselves. They wait for moments where deeper communication is possible, where context can be shared, where understanding can be built more fully. This often happens in private conversations rather than public posts. It is not fear of people. It is fear of being misunderstood. That distinction matters. Fear of people would create distance from all interaction. But this is different. They still connect, they still engage, they still care. They simply choose environments where understanding feels more likely. And this choice continues to shape how they appear online. Their silence is not emptiness, it is selectivity. Their absence is not disinterest, it is intention. They are not inactive, they are selective. They decide where to place their energy, where to share their thoughts, and where to remain quiet. This selectivity is not always visible to others. From the outside, it may look like they are simply not participating. But internally, there is a constant process of observation and evaluation. They notice patterns, they read between the lines, they understand dynamics that are not always obvious. And all of this happens without needing to be expressed publicly. They observe more than they show. That is their natural state. It allows them to stay aware without becoming overwhelmed. It allows them to stay connected without losing themselves in the process. It allows them to maintain a balance that would be difficult to achieve if they were constantly visible. And as this pattern continues, something deeper begins to emerge. A quiet strength that does not rely on attention. A presence that does not need to be announced. A clarity that does not require constant expression. It is subtle, but it is powerful. Some of the most aware people in the world move in silence, not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand when silence is more meaningful than words. They understand that not everything needs to be shared to be real. Not everything needs to be visible to have value. There is a different kind of presence in that silence, one that is not measured by activity or visibility, one that exists independently of external recognition. It is steady, grounded, and intentional. And it reflects a deeper understanding of how energy, attention, and awareness interact in ways that are not always obvious on the surface. Because not everything real needs to be visible. So if you've been quiet online, if your presence feels smaller than what you carry inside, it does not mean you have nothing to share. It does not mean your life lacks meaning or your voice lacks value. It simply means you don't share everything. You choose what deserves to be seen and what deserves to stay protected. You understand that not every thought needs an audience and not every feeling needs a reaction. In a world that constantly pushes for visibility, your silence is not emptiness, it is control, it is awareness. It is a different way of existing where depth matters more than display. And the truth is, many people feel this but never put it into words. They move the same way, think the same way, notice the same things, but stay quiet because it is hard to explain. So if this felt personal, if something in this connected with you on a deeper level, it is because you have experienced it. You are not the only one who sees the world this way. There are others who understand without needing constant expression, who feel deeply without needing to prove it, who observe more than they show. Stay connected to that part of yourself. And if you want more content that understands this quiet depth that speaks to what most people overlook, then stay with us. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who understands but doesn't always speak.